Hi, in this video we'll go over how to do an Emax CAD CEREC crown design. We'll be doing a number 8 anterior crown. On your main screen, go ahead and select number 8. The case details will pop up on the right. Edit those and select Ivoclar and Emax CAD. You'll also want to choose a wet mill for this procedure. Press OK. Then press Next or Acquisition. As you can see, I've already done my scan. It's important to have 100% of your preparation and both proximal contacts. Normally, only the anterior section would be needed to be scanned, but for this exercise, we'll go ahead and do full arch scan on the upper and the lower. Also, make sure to have multiple bite records on both sides of the arch as well as the preparation site. I'll go ahead and click Model. In most cases, if you have a clear margin, your margin will already be marked. However, most times there are edits that need to be made. As you can see in this case, there are multiple areas that are incorrect and will need to be fixed. To correct the margin, hover over an adequate part of the margin and double-click. You will start marking a new patch to the margin. With a series of single clicks, follow the correct contour of the margin until you reach another adequate part of the marked margin and double-click again to join it. We will go around the entire margin, marking any inaccuracies and correcting them in the same manner. It's important to look around from different angles in order to identify the ledge or the difference in color that would signify the margin. It is not uncommon to need to go back and rescan if your margin isn't clear or your scan is inadequate. You can then inspect the margin from different angles to make sure everything is marked correctly. Alternatively, you might choose to mark your margin yourself. In this case, we have to delete the current margin by pressing the Delete button, and then you can start marking your margin using the magnetic marker. To do that, go ahead and double-click on a margin edge and keep your cursor within the margin. The magnetic margin would automatically find the edge. You need to click halfway through the margin and then keep going until you find your first point. If your margin is not very clear, as is the case here, you might need to go back and correct it once more using the technique described earlier. When you're satisfied with your margin, go ahead and click the Next button or the Design button on the top of the screen. The software will now design a bi-generic crown based on the available information from the existing anatomy. Notice how we see some of that blue color shining through the crown. That blue color is representing the minimum thickness needed for Emax. So currently we are under reduced because we see a little bit of that hue color coming out of the facial and the lingual, which means we need to prepare our crown more in order to make sure our crown satisfies the minimum thickness requirements for Emax. If you increase the translucency of the crown, you can see exactly where you need to reduce. In this case, it's the facial and the lingual. Also, notice how the sharpness of the incisal edge forced the crown to be over-milled and thus reducing the thickness of the crown. It's helpful to take note of those areas and go back and change your preparation in order to satisfy the minimum thickness requirements for Emax. This is pretty common and happens quite regularly in clinical practice and is probably one of the strong suits of the CEREC system. We went back and modified our crown preparation. Now, as you can see, we've satisfied the minimum thickness requirements and no blue is shining through the crown, which means our crown is thick enough and our preparation is adequately reduced for an Emax material. You can also see that because our incisal edge is round, no overmilling was necessary and no thickness was reduced. At this point, it is time to tweak the anatomy of the crown, so I'm going to increase its opacity and line up the model and open up my tools. You can line up the tool tabs to wherever it's most convenient, and you can expand the tools by clicking that little square next to the X. For anterior teeth, I like to turn on grid mode, which helps me align the model and make sure I have symmetry between the two incisors. I then take my time to make sure that the model is centered and leveled. You can do that by making sure the tips of the canines and the incisal edges of the lateral incisors are coinciding on the same line bilaterally. It takes a little bit, but it's very useful to make sure you have symmetry between the two central incisors. Once you're happy with your alignment, it's time to start tweaking the individual anatomical areas to make sure you're symmetric with the contralateral side. I usually start with the shape tool, the circular panel, and then an adequately sized radius, and I move the individual areas to make sure I'm symmetrical with the other side. You need to be critical here and look at the individual areas, comparing them one by one to the contralateral side and tweaking your crown to match it. I'm now going to turn to the incisal view in order to compare both sides and make necessary tweaks. You can see here that our natural side has these developmental grooves, but our crown lacks them. For that, you're going to go to these incisal variations, and you can look at the different variations here where they'll automatically create those developmental grooves. You might need to tweak the strength and the type of variation to suit your needs, but you're usually going to find something that fits within those. If you can't see the incisal variation tab, make sure to click that little box next to the X mark. What I like to do next is check my proximal contacts. To do that, I'm going to hide the upper model and look at them. What you want to see is that green mark representing a closed proximal contact. Some people prefer to increase the strength of that contact and then adjust it intraorally. To do that, you'll use the shape tool and increase the strength of that contact until you see a yellow island in the middle of that green circle. The crown is now almost ready to mill. You can take a look at it and make sure the anatomy looks good. This is a generic crown that you modified to make it look like the contralateral. However, there's another way that you can do this by mimicking the contralateral directly. You can go back to administration, click that little pen button, and edit this from by generic individual to copy and mirror. Click OK and yes. The shape of your current crown is now deleted, and you will use the shape of the number 9 to make the number 8. You go back to Model, and down here you'll find a new tab called Copy Line. In this area, you will create a circle around the areas of the contralateral tooth that you'd like to be copied and mirrored onto your current crown. To edit this line, go ahead and click the Tools tab, and then you can use the same clicking pattern we used for the margins to create a circle around the areas that you'd like to take over to your crown. Usually I'll try to cover the line angles and avoid the proximal and occlusal contacts. When you're ready, go ahead and click the Design button, and that will use the areas you've marked on the number 9 to design the number 8. This is very helpful and my method of choice when I'm doing anterior teeth. Sometimes you'll see areas of show-through due to the differences between contralateral teeth. These are usually areas that are easy to fix as long as they don't interfere with occlusion. When you're ready for manufacturing, go ahead and click the Manufacture tab. In this screen, we'll be able to see how the crown fits within the block. You'll be able to also change the type of block. In this case, we'll be changing it to C14, which is the block we carry here. You'll also be able to select the mill of your choosing. Emax is usually milled using a wet mill, so make sure you're selecting the right mill. We'll have separate videos on exporting and milling. Thank you.